We're going to win Pennsylvania. We're going to defeat Comrade Kamala Harris.
We are out here running like we are the underdog in this race because we know what we are fighting for.
We're now 5 days away from the next presidential debate, and both campaigns have finally agreed to the ground rules set by host network ABC. For a brief moment, it was unclear whether this debate would actually go through, given some back and forth over muted microphones. To talk more about this, we're joined by The Hill's White House reporter, Alex Gangitano. So, Alex, there's less than 1 week until the debate, and ABC just released the rules. What are some of the terms that both campaigns have agreed to?
Yeah, so the big sticking point when talking about these rules was the mics and whether they'd be muted or not. Of course, the mics were muted when former President Trump and President Biden debated, if you remember what that layout looked like. And Vice President Harris's team wanted the mics to be hot in this case. They thought that that would actually allow her to have an upper hand, allow her to kind of talk back in the way that we saw when former Vice President Mike Pence interrupted her back in 2020. She said, I'm speaking, and they had this kind of back and forth, and that became a viral moment. So I think they were trying to recreate moments like that. But they ultimately agreed to the mics being muted when another candidate isn't speaking, saying that, the debate itself was in jeopardy. And so we're okay with doing this. Other rules that they agreed to is that candidates, can't leave their podiums, that they can't talk to their campaign team during breaks, that there'll be no opening remarks but closing remarks. So this is going to look a lot like that debate against Trump, with Trump and Biden, but of course with now Vice President Harris on the stage.
And which questions do you think both Harris and Trump campaigns are prepping for the most in terms of potential vulnerabilities and also their strong points?
Yeah, I think right now the Harris team is really focused on how she's going to answer questions about immigration and some flip-flopping she's had about criminalizing or decriminalizing border crossings. When we heard in the CNN interview last week that she said she would actually impose the laws on illegal border crossing. So things like that. Of course, her work on immigration during the Biden administration has been heavily criticized by Republicans. And I also think they're preparing for her to talk about another flip-flop, which has been on the issue of fracking, her saying that she wouldn't ban fracking as president is a change from when she ran in 2019. Former President Trump's team, I think they want him to focus on policy first and foremost over personal attacks, not have any viral moments like he did during the interview with the National Association of Black Journalists when he was talking about Vice President Harris's race. They're trying to avoid moments like that. I think they want him to talk about the economy and that he could do that, and have him argue that he would do better on the economy than the Biden administration, but give specific details as to why he thinks that's the case. So both teams, I think, are really focused here on issues that they think are their challenges, and they're trying to overcome those challenges.
Yeah, lots of issues on both sides, it seems. Trump held a town hall in the battleground state of Pennsylvania with Fox News' Sean Hannity, and it really sort of felt like a Trump rally at times, with the crowd cheering throughout the entire interview. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that town hall, and do you have any major takeaways from it?
Yeah, it definitely felt like a Trump rally. Hannity is, loyal, or is a supporter, and didn't go too hard on the former president during that town hall. Some big takeaways were fracking came up. He, tried to hit Harris on fracking and basically saying, vote for me if you don't want to ban fracking because I'm your only hope. Trying to, argue that Harris would change her mind again. Of course, you mentioned that he was in the critical swing state of Pennsylvania, where fracking is such an essential part of industry there, and an issue that voters really care about. Another thing that Trump talked about was the debate, and he called ABC the worst network in terms of fairness, a dishonest network that is mean and nasty, and all of these attacks on ABC. This is aligning with what we've seen from Trump over the last few weeks, which is basically attacking ABC to open questions over if this debate will happen or not. But it does seem like at this point, even though he's still willing to lay the groundwork, that maybe he can claim later that ABC wasn't fair to him during the debate. If he's not pleased with his performance, it does look like at this point he will be participating in the debate.
Well, Pennsylvania is a top priority for both campaigns. Trump visited the state twice in the past week, while Harris held a Labor Day rally just over the weekend. And Decision Desk HQ forecasting shows Harris has a 53% chance of winning the state. So how are the campaigns approaching voters there? And at this point, is it possible to win without Pennsylvania?
Yeah, that's the big question of how critical is Pennsylvania, but it really is considered the most important of the 7 key battleground states. So not winning Pennsylvania would be a huge setback for either campaign and a hard hole to get out of electoral collegely. So I think, that's why we're seeing both of them so laser focused on Pennsylvania. We know Harris is headed there later today and is going to spend her debate prep in Pittsburgh, and then she will head to Philadelphia for the debate. We've seen Trump there holding rallies. Both of them are showing just how essential this state is. I think that the forecasting from Decision Desk HQ is huge news for the vice president's campaign, because showing that she has the edge over Trump in this critical state that, of course, there's labor groups, there's the issue of fracking and how important that is to industry, all these issues that she kind of has to overcome, challenges to appeal to these voters in a state like Pennsylvania. Having her ahead is huge for her, but I think we're not going to see either campaign settle and assume they have Pennsylvania in the bag, because it is such a critical state that I think up until literally election day, they're going to be focused on it.
Yeah, it really feels like it has become the star of this election. Even though Harris has achieved some momentum behind her campaign, there is some other polling that shows she's currently behind where Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were at this stage of the race. Obviously, her campaign started much later, so there is that difference, but Harris still does see herself as the underdog. So what do you think are the next steps for her here on out?
Yeah, that's rhetoric that we've been hearing, is that she's saying, we are still the underdog. We can't settle. We can't assume we have this in the bag. She doesn't want to fall into the trap of Hillary Clinton's campaign, which they did feel like they had the upper hand, and then they ended up losing to Donald Trump in 2016. So I think she's learned from those mistakes, and she's kind of taken on the model that President Biden has given her, which is always feel like the underdog, always feel like you're underestimated, and that you want to, surprise them at the end. And I think we're going to see her continue to focus on these states like Pennsylvania, on Michigan, on Wisconsin, not just go to California and New York to raise money with these big donors, but actually talk to voters in these battleground states. And that shows that, that kind of a strategy shows that she doesn't feel like she has any of these battleground states set. And yes, fundraising, celebrity endorsements, that's all very important things to the Democratic Party. But at the end of the day, I think her campaign is showing that they are really focused on getting these battleground state voters, because they know the election is going to come down to these razor thin margins in these critical states.
Yeah, it definitely does seem like there was a strategy shift compared to 2016. So Harris's campaign did receive some good news from polling expert Alan Lichtman, who's accurately predicted the outcome of most presidential elections since the 1980s, with 2 exceptions. So can you tell us about his prediction for 2024?
Yeah, so he's basically saying, he's an American University historian who has said that the vice president basically has this already in the bag. But he was, someone who famously predicted that Trump would win in 2016. Of course, people that saw the writing on the wall there, of course, were rare back then. And so people trust them now as someone who can tell, and predict these kinds of things when maybe other people can't. But what's interesting about him is he actually, after the presidential debate between Trump and Biden back in June, he warned that Biden dropping out would actually be an awful mistake for Democrats. That's something that was kind of an unpopular opinion. And so him saying that, Harris is predicted to win is kind of changing his tune, because he thought that, the the president leaving this race would be a huge issue. But now that she's been able to close some of the polling gaps with Trump, he's feeling better about her campaign and thinks that she is in a good position to beat Trump at this point.
Yeah, that's an interesting shift in attitude. At a rally, Harris went off script to address the school shooting in Georgia on Wednesday. What did she have to say about that?
Yeah, so she said she started her scripted remarks basically saying, this is tragic. We're mourning the loss of these high schoolers, and things like this can't keep happening in the US. And then you could tell kind of a shift in her tone, and she made it clear to the crowd that she was going off script. And she was talking about when she'd visit high schools and ask students and colleges as vice president and ask students if they'd ever had to do a active shooter drill. And she said that every student would raise their hand. She, as someone who grew up in California, said as a student in California, we had earthquake drills, and fire drills and things like that. But to have students go through this at their own schools was something that's really troubling to her. We know that President Biden, throughout his campaign and his presidency, has been so focused on curbing gun violence. But the way that she put this personal spin on it did seem like she maybe would look at other routes to curbing gun violence. Of course, the margins in the Senate right now don't allow for much, and the Republican House don't allow for much more legislation to get done in terms of gun violence. And of course, we know how close this election is going to be and how tight the margins might be next Congress. But it could point to the fact that she might be looking at other executive actions in order to curb gun violence, because she did speak kind of on this personal, passionate level that we don't see her do very often.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if she wins, whether we would actually see any changes there. But I want to shift gears here a little bit. RFK Jr. plans to hit the campaign trail with Trump over the next 60 days, hitting states where he's still on the ballot, even though he obviously dropped out. Listen to what he said during an interview with News Nation.
If we're going to accomplish the mission that I set out to accomplish when I got into this campaign, to end the censorship, to end the surveillance, to get out of the Ukraine war and unravel the war machine, to end the chronic disease epidemic, the only way to do that is to get President Trump in the White House.
So if he's still on the ballot in some of these states, does this help or hurt Trump?
Yeah, so I think him going out there and campaigning for Trump as kind of a surrogate is an effort to not hurt him, an effort to get some Americans who resonated with RFK Jr.'s message to say, okay, well, this guy likes Trump. I guess I'll go with Trump this election. But polling has indicated that when President Biden was in the race, RFK Jr.'s candidacy actually hurt Biden more than it hurt Trump. Now with Harris in the race, some polling has shown that now he's hurting Trump more than he would hurt Harris's candidacy, especially in some of these critical states. And so him remaining on the ballot is, of course, a unprecedented strategy for some of these states while he's also campaigning and backing Trump. But I think it's an effort to, be able to do both at once, see how much he can pick up in some of these critical states, while at the same time trying to get voters in states where he's not on the ballot to support Trump if they can't support him. But we'll see, at the end of the day, how much him being at the ballot in some of these states could actually just mess things up for Trump, or if polling in the next several weeks will actually start to show that this tactic could instead hurt Harris.
Yeah, and speaking of critical states, North Carolina is also a key state this election cycle and considered a toss-up now. And so Republicans in the state are really concerned about the governor race between Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who's a Republican, and Democrat Josh Stein. What specifically are Republicans in North Carolina worried about?
Yeah, so this is an interesting race because Robinson is such a hard right conservative and does have some controversial personal history. And so I think Republicans know how critical holding on in North Carolina is, and Democrats are eyeing it as a flip, and they're eyeing it as a battleground state this election. And so there's concerns that a Robinson on the ballot could pull votes away from Trump, that instead of people voting for Trump and then Stein, which split voting is common, but it's, not always the route people go. If people just aren't interested in Robinson's candidacy because of how controversial he is, they then wouldn't vote for Trump. And then losing a state like North Carolina would be detrimental. And it's a state that right now is being considered somewhat of a toss-up this election, with Democrats, again, so focused on flipping North Carolina. Republicans are focused on it too. But as you mentioned, there's some concerns growing about this governor race and how it could, hurt North Carolina Republicans overall this cycle.
Yeah, will definitely be interesting to watch, see what happens. But back on Capitol Hill here in Washington, another government shutdown looms. House Speaker Mike Johnson is trying to cater to Trump and conservatives in the House. But can he do that and find common ground with Democrats? What do you think happens from here?
Yeah, so right now, Speaker Johnson is basically preparing House Republicans for a spending battle, which will be with Senate Democrats who are in power in the upper chamber. And he's trying out a strategy that will make former President Trump happy and hardline conservatives happy, but also trying to avoid a government shutdown. But it definitely complicates that path to avoiding a government shutdown. He's looking at this plan that will include a bill that requires proof of citizenship to register to vote. So that's the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, the SAVE Act that the House Freedom Caucus has been pushing for. And they want basically government funding that includes this bill. But some rank and file members who are, of course, are worried about re-election in November, they want to maybe appear more moderate when they go out and vote in their states. They're skeptical that this could actually hurt the party electorally, but also at the same time could not be the recipe for avoiding a government shutdown at the end of the month.
All right, we'll have to see what happens. Alex Gangitano, White House reporter for The Hill, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Former President Trump pleading not guilty Thursday morning to a revised indictment against him. In that new indictment, special counsel Jack Smith's team scaled back and refined the allegations in the election interference case. It comes after the Supreme Court ruled this summer that presidents have immunity for official acts taken during their time in office. To break down what happened in the courtroom and what comes next, we're bringing in legal expert Robert McWhirter. So Robert, thanks for joining us. U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkin held a hearing this morning on how this case will proceed. So what came out of today's hearing, and will this case move forward as is?
Well, the case will move forward. That's what came out of the hearing. Exactly when it's all going to come down is a little bit still up in the air. I have anticipated, and I would predict, that this case will be tried sometime in January or February. I'm guessing the first week of February. And I think the argument is, look, everybody knew what this case was all about. It's been prepared for, months and months and months. There's no reason to delay it. In fact, the only reason to delay it now is till after the election. And I think that's what will happen. But then barring that, Trump's lawyers will want to continue it until kingdom come. But I think that the prosecutors are going to push for this. So I would expect a February trial date, barring other issues that may come up.
Yeah, January would certainly be interesting if that was in line with inauguration. But this week, a federal judge rejected Trump's request to move his New York hush money case into federal court. Trump is appealing the ruling, but what chances does he have at succeeding in this push? And what benefit would it have to the former president if this case moved? What is he trying to do here?
Well, he's trying to get it all packaged under some kind of federal case so that the federal immunity issues that the Supreme Court laid out then somehow would apply to him. A lot of that immunity doctrine doesn't apply in state court charges. And so he's desperately trying to do that. But really, we can talk about kind of the legal issues, but the issue here is more of a procedural game. I think what Trump's lawyers are doing is throwing anything up they can to just delay the case, to just put more grit in the wheels, to just slow everything down. So again, we can talk about the merits of all these motions all we want, but the real game is to just throw motions out and keep it delayed.
Well, Trump may not be done with the classified documents case in Florida either. Judge Aileen Cannon ruled that Special Prosecutor Jack Smith was improperly appointed, but now Smith is appealing that ruling. So where does that case stand? And will the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity have any impact on the case's merits?
Well, to answer your last question first, I can't see how the presidential immunity ruling will have anything to do with that case. He was out of office when he's alleged to have committed that crime. So it'd be nearly impossible to say that it was in his official duties when he was citizen Donald Trump rather than President Donald Trump at the time. As far as where that case stands, it is now in the Fifth Circuit. I believe that she will be overturned. I'll point out that in Hunter Biden's case, after the Cannon ruling, his lawyers raised the same thing. Because remember, he's being prosecuted by a special prosecutor as well. And the judge there dismissed that argument as really having no merit in the least. So I don't think that Judge Cannon, her ruling will stand. And in fact, I think it's very possible that that case will be given to a different judge because of the poor manner in which she's comported herself during that trial, during that pretrial proceeding. And the rulings that she's made raise eyebrows, to say the least, as being way too favorable to Donald Trump.
Well, speaking of Hunter Biden, there is some breaking news regarding his federal tax evasion trial. Attorneys for Hunter revealed he intends to plead guilty, and this comes as jury selection began today in his case. While conditions of the plea aren't immediately known, how serious are the charges, and what type of sentencing do you think we can expect to see here?
Well, the charges are very serious. He's entering in what's called an Alford plea, which means it's also called a no contest plea, or in Latin, nolo contendere plea, which means he says, look, I'm not going to say I'm guilty, but I agree that the government has enough evidence to prove that I'm guilty. Now, his sentence here is a little bit hard. Before I came on, I was furtively trying to calculate his federal sentencing guidelines. The trouble is we don't have enough information. Did he enter that plea with an agreement to limit the amount of damages? In a tax fraud case, as in all fraud cases, your sentence is calculated on the amount of fraud, the amount of loss. Now, he was accused of fraudulently not paying $1.4 million in taxes. He has since paid back $2 million in taxes. So there's going to be an argument about how much loss there. And if I don't know what the amount of loss is, I can't calculate what his sentence would be. But given the fact he has another conviction, he's in a higher category for sentencing. So he could certainly be looking at prison time, even with a smaller amount of loss in that case. It's just I can't be more precise than that without more information about the plea.
All right, legal expert Robert McWhorter, thanks so much for joining us.
My great pleasure.
Checking in on Decision Desk HQ's forecasting tool ahead of debate week, the latest model showing Vice President Kamala Harris has a slight advantage on former President Donald Trump with a 56% chance of winning the White House. But with 6 states still a toss-up, neither Harris nor Trump are currently favored to secure 270 votes. The forecast has some better news for Republicans in congressional races, though. Decision Desk is predicting Republicans have a 56% chance of keeping their majority in the House and a whopping 70% chance of retaking the majority in the Senate. To look at the latest polling and forecasting, just head over to thehill.com and click on the Elections tab. Russian President Vladimir Putin says that Ukraine's Kursk incursion has failed, further allowing Russia's own advances into eastern Ukraine and weakening Kiev's frontline defenses. Ukraine's surprise incursion into Kursk aimed to divert Russian troops from the front lines of eastern Ukraine in an effort to reshape the battlefield. Putin says Russian forces are now gradually pushing Ukrainian soldiers out of Kursk and that recruitment rates have risen. The incursion has achieved other goals for Ukraine, though, including destroying Russian military assets and taking territory and prisoners for negotiating leverage. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also appointed a new foreign minister and 2 deputy prime ministers amid a massive cabinet overhaul. This comes as Putin teasingly said he supports Vice President Kamala Harris in the upcoming U.S. presidential election. President Biden is preparing to block the sale of U.S. steel to Japan-owned Nippon Steel, according to sources familiar with the matter. The company announced it would acquire U.S. Steel in December, sparking outrage and dissent across party lines over concerns it would undermine national security and industrial capacity. Now, U.S. Steel is warning that it may need to cut staff and change its headquarters in Pittsburgh if the sale falls through. Both Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel have indicated they're prepared to take legal action if the $14 billion merger is blocked. Vice President Harris and former President Trump also voiced public disapproval of the sale. The CEO of Steward Health is refusing to testify before the Senate Health Committee next week, despite being subpoenaed. Ralph De La Torre was asked to testify as part of an investigation into his company's bankruptcy. In a letter to the committee Wednesday, De La Torre said that it would be inappropriate to testify while those bankruptcy proceedings are ongoing, and asked that his testimony be postponed until it's resolved. Steward Health filed for bankruptcy back in May and has since been trying to sell all 30 of its hospitals. De La Torre has faced accusations that he personally profited while his company's hospitals have been failing financially. Committee Chairman Senator Bernie Sanders says he's working with committee members to determine the best path forward. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Bianca Facchinei. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.